Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the fourth Capacity Building Hub at COP27. Today we are on the theme of networks and partnerships, and this session will be relating to the capacity building efforts to youth, specifically moving from learning to influence, the effectiveness and impact of youth capacity building initiatives. My name is Jyri Jäntti. I'm from the Regional Collaboration Centre in Kampala. It's a collaboration between the UNFCCC and the East African Development Bank, where I function as a climate change specialist and will be moderating for you today. This event is a collaboration between UNFCCC Regional Collaboration Centre in Kampala, United Nations University, Fundación Avina, and International Development Research Centre. So we are very much on the theme of having partnerships and networks on this. I will give a little bit time for our IDRC colleagues to give the actual welcoming remarks. So Bhim Adhikari, Senior Program Specialist of Inclusive Sustainable Economies, please go, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here today for this very important side event. My name is Bhim Adhikari. I'm from IDRC in Canada. So we are very pleased to be part of this project with Avina. Avina is our very long-standing IDRC partner. We have been working together for many years. So I'm very delighted to represent IDRC for this important event. So I saw so many familiar faces here who know IDRC very well. But just like to say a few words about IDRC, we are part of Government of Canada's international development effort. We were created in 1970 by the Parliament of Canada. And our mandate is basically supporting research and knowledge generation in developing countries, and all the development challenges that countries are facing. So we are about 52 years old, if I count 1970, and almost we are working almost more than 80, 90 countries all over the world. All three continents, Latin America, Asia, and Africa as well, obviously. So the capacity building is a kind of very integral part of IDRC work. Whatever we do, I think there is a very strong element of capacity building. So all the projects we do, because we have different model of capacity building, and obviously as a research funding organization, I think our entry point is obviously a research project. And all the research projects, I think we try to build the kind of very strong capacity building component. And on the other hand, we also have a very stand-alone type of capacity building. We are supporting networks, we are supporting policy think tanks, we have been supporting universities. So, we have a variety of kind of capacity building model. And then we are very delighted that, whenever we go, I think we see a lot of our alumni or our research partners, representing this kind of forum. So last, I think, 2 sessions, we're also discussing a kind of challenges, for this capacity building, how you go about it. Maybe I'll also, like share a few reflections from my side. So obviously, the one of the challenges, is a very long-term kind of process as well, because many of this capacity building kind of outcome, you will see, after many years of the actual project implementation. So the challenge here is that how we really go about kind of, capturing, those kind of outcome, which comes, down the road, maybe after 5-10 years down the road. So that's kind of, I think this is what kind of challenges, whenever we talk about the impact of the, our capacity building work. And the second also, more on the kind of sustainability side, just last session we were talking about the more like a country-driven or, country-owned type of kind of capacity building kind of activities. But this is also kind of a challenge as well, particularly from the funder side, no matter, how many years we support this kind of activities. And once the project is kind of completed, and then we see that, all those efforts kind of started dying and then they are not moving forward. So I think the challenge, I think, is basically how we can create that kind of ownership at the local level. So even though I think donor funding is kind of not there, so how we can really sustain, those kind of activities for the long term. So this has been a challenge as well. And also, again, coming back to the more impact side, the kind of metrics and the indicators, how we really go about measuring, the impact of all the capacity building effort, I think, that we have been doing. So it's about the metrics, indicators, or kind of an index as well. So yeah, I was delighted this previous session, I think the Paris Committee on Capacity Building, I think they are coming with this toolkit. So I'm hoping that, at least this is going to fill this kind of gap. We really need to know, what happened after, certain intervention kind of completed. So that's a kind of other challenge. And particularly for us, we're also want to see the more like a private sector kind of involvement, some of this capacity building as well. So far, it's basically public finance or like international climate finance, but we haven't seen that traction, how we really go about, helping the private sector, the value of this kind of work. Not only kind of philanthropy side, but it's like there's a strong business case for them as well, to be involved in this kind of capacity building effort. So I think it's how you go about building this kind of public-private kind of partnership around the capacity building. I think that is something I see, one area where perhaps we can have more thinking, or when you move forward, how we really go about, bringing some of those stakeholders, and this kind of work. That's kind of. Yeah, one of the reasons how IDRC also kind of looking, some of those private sector angle as well. So my final point again, there was a point about supply-driven versus kind of demand-driven type of training as well. But I see the very broad line. Even though some of the supply-driven type of project, we have been supporting last 10 years, but once the funding is gone, I think that they are gone as well. So we don't see, that kind of ownership, some of these activities, even, that have been going for many years. So that's a kind of challenge. So how we go about really, making sure that, these things are kind of capture, a different type of, capacity building more at the country level. And whether it is like Ministry of Environment, Climate, or Ministry of Finance. So we really need to be kind of grounded, in some of these element of capacity building. So finally, thanks. I hope that this discussion, I think we have a good panelist here. So I'm sure that you'll be deliberating on some of these important issues, and we'll be delighted to receive some feedback as well. And one of my colleagues is not here today, Walter Ubal, who is really looking after this project. So we'll be very delighted, to have some of this, reflection, what is going to happen, next 1.5 hours. So this is going to be very helpful for us. So again, thanks so much for inviting us, and always a very pleasure, working with our partners in the Global South, and we are looking for, very logical conclusion of this project, and hopefully, let's see, we can also build some further collaboration, on this very important topic. Thanks again, and have a nice discussion for all. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bim, for those opening remarks. I would like to invite to the stage Emmanuel Cheo from the Pan-African Cooperation and Educational Technologies Program at the United Nations University. He's going to set up the scene a little bit. How did we get here? We've had these conversations at the regional climate weeks, both in Africa and in Latin America. So to recap a little bit of those conversations and how to move forwards. Thank you, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction. So my name is Ambe Emmanuel Chio, and I work with the Pan-African Cooperation on Education Technology. In short, it's called PASEP, which is hosted by the Vice Rectorate of the United Nations University in Bonn, Germany. So the United Nations University, it's a think tank and the academic arm of the United Nations. So what I'm going to do today is to set the scene for the panel discussion, which is quite challenging, taking into consideration also that the topic itself, it's really a challenging topic and also a time-demanding and at a right discussion topic for the day of today. So it's quite an honor for me to do this, and maybe I start first by thanking you for attending the section, and also to thank the PCCB for providing this platform to share knowledge as well as to learn from one another. As you must have learned from the flyer of this event or from the PCCB platform, the event today is a series of events that we have been organizing in our consortium of partners, which include Fundación Avina, IDRC, the United Nations University, and the UN Climate Change Regional Collaboration Centre. So it all started with a session at the Latin America and Caribbean Climate Week, and then later on to the African Climate Week. So a key message from the Latin American Climate Week was a question on the ad hoc centrism of climate policy processes in which the voices of youth are often minimized, even though they will be highly impacted by climate change. So there was a clear message from the youth that they don't want people to talk on their behalf, but they want to be part of the solution. In the African Climate Week, we had a different approach for the session, whereby it was more focused on providing a platform for youths and youth-related stakeholders to share recommendations and their views on capacity building effort to enhance youth leadership in climate action. So the event took stock on youth capacity building initiative in Africa, as well as exploring challenges and showcasing solutions across Africa. So taking into consideration that today the focus is on amplifying network for collective capacity building, and what this session wants to demonstrate with the distinguished panelists that we have is to, among other reasons, is to show how multi-stakeholders, which include academia, technology and innovation hub, funders, development and cooperation agency, as well as policymakers, could come together to build capacity and support youth and women innovations and entrepreneurs in implementing climate action as well as solutions in the global south. So stakeholder support in capacity building still remain very fragmented, and as a result, the support for locally implemented solutions are either weak or absent. Nonetheless, with the right knowledge and skills, mentorship, financial resources, enabling policies, youth-led enterprises can grow economy and create job opportunity while leapfrogging the classical developmental path that contributes to the national climate agenda of the participating countries. So in this respect, with our consortium of partners, there are two projects that I want to highlight, which serve as a perfect example for the session. And this is the Impulsouth project, which we heard from the previous session, and as well as the Greennovation project funded by IDRC. Both projects are funded by IDRC. So in both projects, the objective of the PCCB on closing the gaps and needs, both current and emerging, is implementing capacity building in developed countries. So these two projects addresses the objective of the PCCB in closing gaps in capacity building. With the Greennovation project taking a step further by trying to understand the ecosystem of youth and women in green innovation and entrepreneurship, and also identifying the capacity building gap, as well as strengthening strengthening their capacity. In this project also, youths are shaping concrete solutions for climate action and deploying them in different models, including entrepreneurship through startup as group of innovators, consultants, policymakers, and even academia. However, the resources accorded to the youth and women innovators and entrepreneurs are limited. So youth are, in both projects, youth are strategically organized in different frameworks to influence and respond to climate action at intersection. I think this is important, to influence and respond to climate action at intersection with multi stakeholders, including government, the private sector, the civil society, and communities. So I would like to conclude my talk with some findings that we had from a research that was conducted in the frame of the Impulsouth project, that even though network building in building capacity building, it's very important, it's also necessary to pay attention on the following, that fostering capacity building should have a country ownership and also promote local stakeholder engagement. So it should also incorporate soft skills such as communication, leadership, which normally cannot be learned in an academic program. And then it should also build bridges, the gap between the project aims and the local context. This is very important because sometimes the project aim is always far away from the local context. So in building capacity building, we should always try to incorporate the project objective as well as take into consideration the local context. And last but not least, a capacity building project should also be flexible in adapting new approaches to teaching and learning. So I will end my talk here, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of the event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I had the pleasure of being at Africa Climate Week and following some of the conversations with the youth. And one of the interesting topics that came up over and over again is that youth is not only a capacity building receiver, but increasingly also capacity builders. You receive some and you also pass that knowledge down. So on that topic, I want to start with Jonathan and Ezekiel, on just to have a little bit of a reflection on the capacity building that you have received, what you have seen as the obstacles or the best practices, and while you are also doing capacity building forwards, what are some of these ways forwards or improvements that we can introduce. So please also start with a short introduction from yourselves to let the audience know how did you end up here. So Jonathan, maybe we start with you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Jonathan Andreas. I work for the Ministry for Environment and Sustainable Development in Madagascar as a division chief in charge of the coordination of adaptation policies. Regarding to the capacity building that the training from Impulsouth that I received, I think it's really good in the case where it is really related to my work. Implementing projects, creating policies and plans, which is very useful, and with a lot of very great intervenants, very good teachers. It's also, as Emmanuel mentioned earlier, you have to learn new approaches, and that's what was the plus, what was the something new in the training that I received. For example, we learn how to find in which level we can add innovation, how to communicate better, how to be a leader. But as you know, leadership is more on doing it than learning it. So it's very good. It's very good, very good. And also there is a continuation. Some of the training, for example, that we receive from other partners, they are just limited. For example, we get a training for 5 days or for 3 months, but it's limited in that. There is a continuation with the solution labs, with Fundación Avina, that help us to develop more our ideas, the solutions that we identified earlier, and it's very good. The kinds of thing for the training is, the trainings in general is the way of mixing theoretical aspects and practical aspects. Theoretical aspects is depending on depending on which people you're training. Some people, for example, already know what are the effects of climate change, what are the plans that we have to implement, what are the things that you have to search, and repeating those theoretical aspects is sometimes limiting the training. And as I mentioned earlier, we had this issue with all capacity building related actions in our country. For example, you have training on how more to communicate, how have a leadership, what is climate change, and it's almost the same, theoretical. And people are searching for more practical things, more related to their situations. For example, if I'm a small entrepreneur, I really need something which is related to my everyday life. So it's really it's one of the principal cause of all training. One also that I can add is the lack of support. For example, you need internet connections for some of the people who receive the training. They need internet connections, but they don't have that. You know, it's the issue. It's really the big issue of it. You want to do something, but you're limited in some practical ways. You're limited in what you're doing, and I think that's all for me. It's the big line. When you want something, when you have a capacity building training, you need that training to be related to what you're doing, what you have already studied, for example, and also you need it to that in practical way. You need some support. You can't just do it by yourself.
Thank you very much. I really find that an interesting point that it's not one size fits all, and there are specific needs, and it needs to be tailored and needs to be continuous. It's not a weekend and after that capacity building is over. But yes, Ezekiel, I would like to ask the same question from you and hear a little bit from your experiences, your reflections.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Ezekiel Yamfa, and I'm from Liberia, West Africa. The issue with capacity building has to be on a level playing field. There are young people from other regions of Africa whose capacity are more built than other youth from other parts of Africa. So when we come at the global level, you find that there are other young people who are ineffective in delivering, and other young people who have more capacity. So we need to level the playing field in Africa from east, west, south to North Africa. All the young people need to access capacity building at an equal level. Another thing, some of the best practices I have experienced over the time is that peer-to-peer capacity building works very well. You train the young people, give them the skills, the knowledge, and allow them to train other young people, because we are able to communicate with each other better than having the old folks in front of us. Sometimes it looks boring to listen to them give long speeches. We don't have the time for that. If you actually want young people to take charge, you have to trust them. You have to believe in them. You have to give them the space. And the space for implementation is very key. Now, the question I want to ask the developer of this capacity building workshop is that, are young people co-developer of the program you are having now? If young people are not part of this development that we are carrying on now, you have to go back to include them to become part of this development of the capacity building workshop. Take them from the diverse background. Get young people from West Africa, where I'm from. Get young people from East Africa, from South Africa, from North Africa. Bring them together. Put them on a panel, on a committee, and tell them to look at the challenges in their various regions. What are they facing? What are the best practices? And allow them to develop the capacity building program for themselves. But I don't know what that is happening. But I think it's very critical from my end. From West Africa, we have limited capacity building. That's why you found out that more young people are not involved in the solution. Another thing, the issue of lifelong learning is very key. In my country, our NGO, the Liberian Youth for Climate Actions, we are advocating for climate education to be a subject in school. Because when the kids from the primary level, the secondary level, the tertiary level, when they are learning from their childhood, you are building the capacity of them. They become more climate resilient before they reach the other stage. So you cannot build my capacity when I'm already at a very older age. You have to start from the bottom, top approach. Include them from the bottom, allow them to grow in the climate knowledge, allow them to practicalize what they have learned. And when they reach the adulthood, they are able to develop innovative solutions. Sometimes it is challenging for us. I was not taught about climate change in school. Now, if I were taught about climate change in school, I would have done more impact than I'm doing now. There's a challenge. We are here at COP27. It's my very first time at COP, and that is unfair. The young people need to be included. If I was able to attend these events, it means that I will be able to carry back those knowledge to my country and be able to impact another young people. Now, let me come to the obstacles that we face as young people. Limited access to funders. I know you have been hearing about it before, but we will keep on flagging this issue until you listen to us. I know on every event I go for, I always tell them limited access to climate funders. And some people say, we have been hearing this, we have been hearing it. We will keep saying it until you listen and implement what we are saying. The young people need access, not just access to climate funders, they need more access to climate funders. You are unable to implement the solution in the community. We are in the community. We know what we are facing in the community. We know what we are seeing in the community. We know what we are experiencing in the community. So if you cannot allow the young people to be capacitated and give them the space and finance to implement bankable climate solution, then you are not building capacity of young people. You are only doing a charade. You are only trying to. We don't want you to act like you want to include us. It is not an action. We want you to include us, but don't act like you want to include us. So if you are bringing me on a panel now to speak about my experience, and from here I leave and go to my country, I don't know how am I going to get included, it becomes a big question for us. Because sometimes you include us on the stage to speak and to give our opinion on what we are experiencing. And after we speak, like my brother said, 2-3 days for 2-3 days events, we go home, we are nowhere to be found anymore. You have to include her in the process. Lastly, you have to include young people, you have to include women, you have to include the local community and the indigenous people. They are at the front line of the climate crisis. If you want to build the capacity of these people on this panel, you should have had someone from the indigenous community on this panel to be able to tell you what they are facing, the challenges they are facing, the obstacles they are facing, the impact they are facing, so that when they tell you these things, you are able to create a program, a capacity building program that will actually address the climate impact and vulnerability in our community. To close on this note, please, I'm begging you, do not bring young people on the table and allow them to speak and leave. Let us become co-developers in capacity building programs. You are developing the capacity. You are building a program to develop my capacity. Have you assessed my needs? Do you know what I want? Or do you assume that I need this? Assess my need. Let me be a co-developer of the process, and let me be the implementer of this capacity building program. And also, lastly, let me be able to be on the stage. You have many young people in this room. Some of them are just here, they are not even negotiating. You don't bring out here to just go to pavilion and listen to events, and the real issue is being discussed in closed-door meetings. And we are not in the room. Thank you.
Thank you. Powerful thoughts, and we're starting to find these themes of we need to have continuity in the capacity building, we need to have local context, have the inclusion so that there's ownership. It's the capacity building needs to be targeted for the people and involve them. And we also need to have access to finance and to have a flow of knowledge so that the knowledge doesn't stay here, but also everything that is learned in great opportunities like attending COP, that can also flow then forwards. So that actually brings me to Andres Mogoro from Fundación Avina. It would be very nice to hear a little bit more about the Impulsouth project that you're running and some of these issues that have now been raised. How are you going to address these, or how do you already are addressing these? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Good afternoon already. It's been very good to hear from the experiences both that Emmanuel was raising at the beginning and the experiences of the panelists around capacity building initiatives. I have myself been part of capacity building initiatives, again, as a receiver of capacity building and as a provider. I do still consider myself to be part of youth, although in a couple of years that probably shouldn't be the case. But it's good that I can consider myself to be that still. As part of the Impulsouth project, Fundación Avina has been implementing Impulsouth project the last couple of years from the support of IDRC, UNU, and Fundación Avina. And we have developed a couple of capacity building initiatives in that context that have been aimed at the 6 countries that are forming part of Impulsouth project, that include Guatemala, Dominican Republic, Zambia, Uganda, Niger, and Madagascar. And we organized in that context 2 different capacity building processes, one with UNU in Africa and one with Flaxo in Latin America with the Latin American Faculty on Social Studies. And it was interesting to see some of the lessons that we learned from the process and some of the feedback that we got from the participants as well. And while we were assessing on the feedback of these processes, we realized that some of the most important things that you can get from a capacity building process, aside from the impact on those that have participated in the process itself, are the lessons that you learn from having implemented that process and the feedback that you get from those that participated in that process. And we decided to launch a research study on capacity building processes that have taken place in the last couple of years globally, but mainly, of course, in the global south. And we identified 10 experiences that have been relevant on capacity building initiatives to foster capacity building in the youth. And during that research, we came up with a couple of obstacles and lessons learned that I would like to highlight, if that's okay. So first, these courses that we mapped are all virtual. We didn't map in-person sessions that have a different methodology and, of course, a different impact. We mapped courses from 2015 to 2022, mainly in Spanish and English, all with a duration at least of 1 month, maximum 6 months, because it turns them into different things otherwise, and with the participation of NGOs, governments, universities, UN system, and the objective of building climate leadership in young professionals and women in particular. Some of the lessons that we learned in that mapping and in that research. Usually, capacity building processes that are aimed at building capacities towards climate action tend to focus at least 50% of their time on introduction to climate science. And that can be a burden because at least the feedback that we've been getting is it can be very technical. It can sometimes be far from the realities that participants are feeling in the ground. And then the rest, the remaining 50% tends to go into deeper discussions. But when, and there are different types of courses in that sense, sorry, those that assume participants already have a knowledge on climate change and they don't dedicate as much time to going into climate science, and those that don't. And the first type of courses tend to be more practical in nature versus a more conceptual or academic approach. So in that sense, we identified 6 challenges for virtual capacity building processes to build capacity in youth and women. The first is that, as I was saying, there tends to be a complexity in the introduction. And that, of course, can be boring or a disincentive for participants. The second is that, at least in virtual courses, there's always a large number of applicants and participants. The courses that we mapped had between 500 and almost 3,500 participants, so more than 3,000 participants in a single course. That, of course, limits the type of interaction that either teachers or panelists or invited speakers can have in a virtual way, and that is very important from our experience. We also saw that most of these courses had, at least at the end, a final paper or a final work, if you will, and that the selection of those proposals, particularly because some of these courses had seed funding, was very difficult because proposals were very good in quality. And this, of course, highlights a need for more seed funding in courses. This is a big incentive, particularly for virtual courses, where you have at the end a paper or some sort of work that can apply to seed funding. That is a very good incentive for participation, for completion in the course. But in general, all virtual courses have a high drop-off rate. And that relates particularly from live sessions because of family care obligations, work. We saw a lot of people taking the courses while driving, for instance. That was dangerous, not something that we would encourage. And we saw also a good opportunity for courses not to necessarily have as many live sessions as one would think. This was something interesting for me because I thought live sessions were a good space for people to interact with each other, but the results of the research show at most one live session a week is feasible, and more than that tends to have drop-off rates from participants. But when you do have asynchronous work, so not live work, it is advisable to have a higher grade that is required in the course. And finally, just in the terms of challenges, because I do want to go into good practices and lessons learned, in terms of challenges, there's been a lot of interest from participants in courses to keep networks alive. So they got in touch with each other, they identified each other, they shared experiences, and they want to keep those networks alive. But in the courses that we analyzed, that has been very difficult to do in a sustainable way because it requires additional human resources and financial resources that aren't usually planned as part of the capacity building process. So now in terms of good practices and lessons learned, I think this is the most important or interesting part. I hope I'm not boring you. In terms of good practices and lessons learned, the first thing that we learned from this research is capacity building is a process, and therefore it's not something that you can do with just a course. It's something that needs a mixture of tools, which include live sessions, yes, but it also includes asynchronous work and workshops, and the possibility of forming a network so students can stay in touch. And of course, most important of all, a practical component to conversations. People speaking about their experiences or showing their experiences, or maybe getting away a little bit from the definition or the academic side of things and looking at something on the ground. It is also beneficial to include different sectors, countries, or regions, and participants, including youth participants, like you were mentioning, in the design of the capacity building programs. This is very important because that gives the opportunity to showcase personal and local experiences and studies. In terms of course duration, this is also something that called my attention. Virtual courses are not recommended for more than 2 months. If you have a course that lasts for more than 2 months, you will have a very high drop-off rate. And in those 2 months, no more than 1 session a week, live session a week is recommended. So it's a maximum of 8 live sessions and no more than that because people tend to leave the course. There are mixed ways of engaging, including recordings, fora, social media interactions. That is important so that people don't feel like they're looking at bibliography without anyone accompanying them. As I said, I think I've already mentioned this, there needs to be a balance between the presentation of key elements and contents with the practical and participatory methodology. So participatory methodology is key. And of course, it's important to identify and promote incentives for the completion of the course. Be that as a course certificate, which is pretty standard, but something additional, like a seed fund, for instance. We had a course in Impulsouth projects in our Impulsouth project that had the possibility to present projects at the end, and students were able to access a seed fund of $5,000. It's not a lot, but it's an incentive to implement the project that they proposed. And that, of course, was a very good experience in terms of the quality of projects that we received, because it wasn't just an academic exercise for students to comply with homework, but to actually present something they could get finance to. Another incentive is participation in these spaces, like the COP, or creating an in-person exchange. And I can speak a little bit from experience, and let me know if I'm going a little bit over time. Okay, I can speak a little bit from experience. It's one thing, what you see in the course is one thing, and what you can listen and read and hear people is one thing, but it's another to come to these processes. And my first COP was 10 years ago, and I was very young 10 years ago, younger than I am now. And nobody told me to wear comfortable shoes because you walk a lot. Or nobody told me it's good to get a couple of snacks in breakfast in the hotel because it's difficult to have meals in a COP, or that things are very expensive here. Having a $19 sandwich for youth is probably not the most recommendable. So these types of things you learn with experience. I think it's important to find that incentive also to bring youth and have that experience, and then share that experience in a capacity building process. Because as you say, there's very little that you can learn that needs experience that you can do in just an academic fora. And I will leave it at that. I hope I can come back again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask Pilar Bueno from the academic side of things a little bit about, we've seen some of these issues and we've seen some of the best practices on how we could do capacity building. But so how do we look at what is a successful capacity building project or program, and how do we ensure that this has a little bit of a flow also beyond the original recipients of the capacity building? So Pilar, if you can go a little bit about that. We are starting to be short on time, so brevity will be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm not so good being brief, so sorry. Now I will try to respect my time. I had the opportunity to share also as Andres and my colleagues here on the table some of the experiences coming from the Impulsouth project. And in particular, I heard this from the colleagues before in terms of not size fitting all. And it's important to say that even though each project has its own characteristics, it's very important in order to assess and to achieve effectiveness, if that is the case, if it's possible, since there are different methods, different methodologies in order to do so. At least to recognize that there are some steps, some features that need to be taken into account, and I think that all the previous speakers talk about some of them. So one of them in terms of the Impulsouth project was from the very beginning, the idea to optimize the impact by the selection of the countries. So when you have to select the countries, the project, of course, as many other alliances and projects need to pursue and to check, we did it by using a matrix of indicators and dimensions and trying to help the partners that finally would choose the countries that, as the previous speakers expressed, were 4 from Africa, 2 from Latin America, how to choose what we so-called countries with climate will, but at the same time to understand that they could lack some capacities in terms of reporting and communicating to the UNFCCC, considering that the Impulsouth project has also this very interesting linkage between the local level, the national level, and international level towards the GST. So that was one of the first, I think, ideas and one of the most important steps of the project. That in order to provide more impact to the outcome from the very beginning. So another one, of course, and mentioned in the panel before and in here is the country ownership. To have the opportunity with the focal points to select the topic also from the beginning, that it was for the research process, was focused on identifying gaps and needs in one moment of the adaptation policy cycle, that is the BA, the vulnerability and risk assessment. So that was also very important with a focus on gender. So all the focal points agreed on the same topic, and that gave us a first start, even when the different universities that are part of the project and conduct the national teams selected different sectors: agriculture, coastal management, water, or even some local cases for applying the different methodologies and for making the research, conducting the research itself. We also, this approach, this multi-stakeholders engagement, and in particular, in our case, the action research process-oriented project, I think it was quite critical in order to have the outcomes that we have so far, and that will be published soon in our webpage, in the Impulsouth webpage. So that was also very important, even during the pandemic. That was, of course, or add additional challenges for the national teams in order to develop all the methods that they selected in their plans, including the focus groups, the interviews. In many cases, they need to change the methods or to adjust them to the pandemic context. Also, of course, to clarify and to adjust, if it's necessary, these mechanisms and methods. We saw that the groups need to make that adjustments, and they did it on time and they fit for purpose. The audience and the purpose of the project, of course, is always very important. And And one more also related to the previous conversation on the PCCV tools, and that they were also applied to this project in terms of the conceptual framework and also the methodological framework, is to focus on a particular moment of the capacity building cycle. For us, that was also very important, because something that came during the research process, the sixth research process many times, is that it was difficult to focus on the VA, because of course there are so many gaps and needs in the developing countries, both in Africa and Latin America, that the national teams many times, of course, find this difficult to just focus on those gaps and needs, since there are so many other issues on the contextual and the adaptation policy cycle per se that were important. So you will see in the outcomes of the research also the richness of that process. Yeah, I know I have to finish. So just to invite everyone to visit the web page to see the publication of the research of the 6 teams that are already there. In some cases we are publishing in the last month of this year, and also to visit the guideline that is developed in Spanish, in English, and in French, making use of PCCV tools, so you can see that connection in a good shape. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We would definitely have a lot of material to talk for a notably longer time about this topic. I think we've identified a lot of gaps and also a lot of solutions how we can improve our capacity building efforts. But just to come and close the session for us, wrap everything up, I would like to invite Makoto Kato, from a senior researcher from the Overseas Environmental Cooperation Center in Japan. The stage is yours. Thank you very much.
Hello. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues. My name is Makoto Kato from the Overseas Environmental Cooperation Center, Japan. Well, this is my favorite topic of youth and capacity building, because I have been, as a negotiator, I engaged for the capacity building and also ACE almost since COP10 in Buenos Aires, so that it's been a very long time since I have been engaged. But at the same time, I am working on this topic as a practitioner to push forward, well, in my country, but also in our partner countries, well, mostly in developing countries. And I think we have, I see, well, the strong response from my partners. And today, well, we have variety of discussion, variety of sharing of experiences, and I think this is fantastic. And I think colleagues on the panel, well, they want to talk more, and I think this is the evidence of evidence of our appetite, evidence of our feeling of pushing this forward with you. And I think it is not possible to do this alone. I think the capacity building, cooperation, and partnership, these are important for us to scale up. So let us continue our work and let us scale up. And I hope you will be joining us in our future activities. So with this, I would like to congratulate the organizers and also the participants and presenters for the very successful organization of this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those closing remarks. I hope that we can continue these conversations further in the Capacity Building Hub and on the sidelines of COP. And thank you for your attention, and this session is now closed. Thank you.